The Kalahari stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of gold grass and scattered acacia trees that had seen more sunrises than anyone could count. Dr. Marcus Webb stood at the edge of the camp perimeter, watching the horizon shimmer with heat when he heard it. A sound so faint it could have been wind through thorns. But Marcus knew better. He had spent 15 years in African wildlife research, and his ears had learned to distinguish the thousand sounds of the savanna. This particular vocalization was distress, pure and unmistakable. The research station where Marcus and his team had established their base was meant to be a sanctuary, a place where endangered species could be studied and protected away from poaching. But the Kalahari had its own rules, written in dust and blood, and the ancient hierarchy of predator and prey. The reserve could offer protection from human threats, but not from nature itself. When Marcus saw the small shape struggling through the tall grass at the edge of camp, his breath caught. It was a lion cub, barely larger than a house cat, moving with the stumbling gait of something at the absolute end of its strength. Even from 50 yards away, Marcus could see the animal's ribs visible through matted fur. The cub was severely dehydrated, profoundly malnourished, and close to collapse. What struck him most was the absence of a mother. Lions did not simply abandon their cubs unless something catastrophic had happened. This cub was alone, which meant the mother was likely dead, or the pride had been destroyed. Either way, a young lion traveling alone across open savanna had no future. The creature continued forward despite its distress, moving with desperate determination toward camp, as if sensing that proximity to humans was somehow safer than remaining alone in the vast bush. Marcus made a decision in that moment without consulting anyone, without fully thinking through the implications that would alter both their lives in ways neither could anticipate. The moment Marcus moved toward the cub, the small animal froze completely. The small lion's amber eyes locked onto him with the intense focus and clarity of a predator recognizing another sentient being. Even as the animal's body trembled, visibly with weakness and fever. Marcus had learned long ago during his years in the field that wild animals operated primarily on instinct, three core drives that governed every decision: fear, hunger, and survival. This cub was operating on all three simultaneously, and that combination made the animal unpredictable and dangerous despite its diminished physical state. He moved slowly, with deliberate movements designed to communicate non-aggression, speaking in low tones that he kept just barely above a whisper, using the same soft voice he employed when approaching frightened animals or nervous humans in crisis. The cub watched him approach with what seemed like a complex mixture of desperate hope mixed with primal caution, the competing drives evident in the animal's posture. Marcus could see clearly that the animal was barely maintaining consciousness, pushed to the edge of collapse by whatever ordeal had brought it to this place, to this moment, to this desperate encounter with a human it had no reason to trust. The cub stumbled forward one more step, clearly unable to continue standing much longer, and Marcus caught it gently before it could fall to the ground. The animal was burning with fever. Marcus could feel the heat radiating from its tiny body, and weighed almost nothing in his arms. Perhaps 30 pounds, if that, though according to all the research Marcus knew about lion development, a healthy cub of similar apparent age should have weighed considerably more. Marcus could feel every individual rib through the matted fur, could feel the rapid, shallow breathing that indicated profound shock and systemic collapse. He carried the cub back toward the main tent, moving as quickly as safety allowed, where Dr. Sarah Chen, the camp's veterinarian and Marcus's research partner of 3 years, was cataloging plant specimens she had collected that morning. Sarah took one look at the cub and her professional composure cracked visibly. Years of training and emotional control seemed to dissolve in that single moment as she recognized what she was seeing. She immediately began organizing an examination area with efficient precision, pushing aside research materials and clearing space on the examination table they had set up for treating injured wildlife that occasionally came into contact with the camp. The cub was conscious in a technical sense, but completely unresponsive to anything except the presence of the humans around it. Sarah began her initial assessment while Marcus held the animal steady, his hands gentle but firm. She worked with the clinical precision that had made her the perfect veterinarian for remote field research. The cub's body temperature was dangerously elevated at nearly 105 degrees Fahrenheit, a reading that Sarah documented before beginning her physical examination. Its gums were pale, indicating severe dehydration and the possible presence of internal bleeding. Parasites could be seen moving through the animal's matted fur. The cub's paws were cracked and bleeding from what looked like days of desperate travel across harsh and unforgiving terrain. Sarah worked methodically through her examination, documenting everything with the precision of someone who understood that information and observation could mean the difference between life and death. The cub had significant injuries on its left hindquarter, long parallel slashes about 8 inches long that looked like they had come from another predator's claws, consistent with attack from a larger lion. The wounds were infected, showing signs of early abscess formation, and had been bleeding intermittently, evidenced by dried blood matted into the fur around the injury site. Whatever had happened to the mother and the rest of the pride that this cub had belonged to, this young animal had been attacked by another predator and had somehow managed to escape with its life. Sarah and Marcus exchanged a look that communicated everything they needed to say without speaking a single word. This cub should not have survived this long, given the severity of its injuries and its malnourished state. The fact that it had managed to make it to their camp was either the result of extraordinary luck or suggested some fundamental will to live that transcended the normal logic of injured wild animals. Sarah began stabilization immediately, addressing the most critical threats to the cub's survival with practiced efficiency. She worked with Marcus's assistants, gathering supplies and preparing the IV setup with the precision of someone who had performed this procedure hundreds of times. She inserted an IV line carefully into the cub's foreleg, finding a vein despite the severe dehydration. Once secured, she administered fluids mixed with carefully calculated electrolytes designed to combat systemic collapse. The cub whimpered but did not resist, understanding on some cellular level that these humans meant help. Marcus held the small head steady while Sarah worked, murmuring reassurances. The breathing stabilized almost immediately as fluids entered the circulatory system, hydrating cells starved of water for days. Sarah then turned to the infected wounds on the cub's hindquarter. She cleaned the parallel slashes carefully, removing dead tissue and debris with mindful technique, working aware that additional trauma could cause deeper shock. The injuries appeared to be from another lion's claws, possibly from territorial dispute that had separated the cub from its pride. Marcus thought about the complex social politics of lion packs, the elaborate hierarchies that often ended in violence. This cub was a victim of those dynamics. Sarah applied broad-spectrum antibiotics, wrapped the wounds carefully, creating protective barriers against infection. The pain medication she administered through the IV seemed to help the cub relax, muscles unclenching from rigid tension. Throughout the night, Marcus sat beside the cub on a folding chair, monitoring breathing and vital signs while Sarah rested in shifts. The cub's fever remained elevated, but gradually decreased as fluids and medication took effect. Around midnight, the cub opened its eyes and looked directly at Marcus with true awareness. There was clarity in those amber eyes, recognition that something fundamental had shifted. The immediate threat to survival had been reduced, at least temporarily. Marcus found himself speaking continuously throughout the night, explaining what he was doing, narrating his actions and observations as if the cub could understand English. In truth, the words were probably more for Marcus, a way of processing what was happening, establishing connection with an animal that should have been dangerous, but was instead vulnerable and dependent. Sarah had named the cub Leo during her examination, a practical choice given they needed some way to refer to the animal. The name felt appropriate given the animal's amber eyes and noble bearing despite distress. By morning, after 12 hours of intensive care, Leo was conscious enough to recognize when Sarah approached with food. They had prepared special formula designed for young carnivores, diluted to be easy on a digestive system that had gone days without nutrition. Leo's instinct to eat was remarkably strong despite trauma, and though weak, the animal consumed a small amount from a bottle with specialized nipple. Sarah watched carefully for signs of rejection or distress. Remarkably, Leo's digestive system accepted the food without incident. This was progress. Real measurable progress suggesting Leo might actually survive the terrible ordeal that had brought him to camp. The first week following Leo's arrival was measured entirely in small victories and careful ongoing management of the cub's condition. Sarah established a precise feeding schedule, carefully calculating the amounts and gradually increasing the complexity of Leo's diet as the cub's digestive system recovered from its period of starvation. She kept detailed records of consumption amounts, timing, and any digestive responses. The infection in the wounds on Leo's hindquarter showed clear signs of responding to the antibiotic treatment, the inflammation gradually decreasing, and the tissue around the injuries beginning to show healthy coloration. Leo's fever broke dramatically on the third day of treatment, an event that coincided with a noticeable and profound change in the cub's overall behavior and demeanor. No longer fighting just to survive from moment to moment through sheer biological imperative, Leo began to display curiosity about the humans caring for him. The cub would follow Marcus and Sarah around the tent with its eyes, tracking their movements with increasing focus and clear engagement. A personality began to emerge from behind the trauma and shock. By the end of the first week, Leo was able to stand on wobbly legs and take a few tentative steps, though the injured hindquarter still caused obvious discomfort and pain. Marcus began spending significantly more time with the cub, not just monitoring its medical status and physical recovery, but simply being present in a way that went beyond clinical care. He would sit on the floor of the tent for hours and allow Leo to approach him at whatever pace felt comfortable to the animal. The cub's natural wariness of humans, that healthy caution that wild animals possess instinctively, began to soften perceptibly over those early days. Leo seemed to understand on some deep and primal level that these two particular humans were fundamentally different from humans in the broader sense. They provided food and comfort and safety rather than threat or violence. Sarah would observe these interactions with scientific interest mixed with something more personal and emotional. She had trained extensively to treat animals, had studied veterinary medicine and anatomy and pharmacology, but witnessing the actual moment that a wild animal began to trust a human was qualitatively different from anything her training had prepared her for. It was raw and real and deeply complicated. Leo began to eat with increasing aggression and enthusiasm as days passed, his appetite returning fully as his body recognized it was no longer in immediate mortal danger. The cub consumed everything offered by Sarah and Marcus, and Sarah adjusted the portions upward and increased feeding frequency, monitoring weight gain with careful precision through regular weighing sessions. By week 2, Leo had regained enough strength to explore the tent environment more actively, investigating every item and surface with the playfulness and curiosity of a young animal discovering the world for what felt like the first time. The cub would pounce on shadows cast by lantern light, wrestle with blankets and rope, and engage in the rough play that seemed absolutely essential to healthy development and the proper maturation of predatory instincts. Marcus and Sarah took turns engaging with Leo during these increasingly energetic play sessions, understanding that the interaction was not just enrichment activity, but was actually necessary for the cub's psychological development and emotional well-being. A lion separated from its pride at this developmental age should statistically have been dead within days. Leo's survival and his apparent rapid recovery suggested either extraordinary resilience or the possibility that he carried instincts and survival mechanisms stronger than the typical programming of his species. Sarah documented absolutely everything in meticulous scientific detail throughout this period. The complete timeline of recovery, the behavioral changes and their timing, the physical improvements and weight gain measurements. She took hundreds of photographs and maintained detailed chronological notes, acutely aware that they were witnessing something that most researchers would never have the opportunity to directly observe. A wild predator was developing genuine trust and emotional bond with humans, not through captive breeding or hand-rearing from infancy, but through rescue and intensive care during a critical crisis period. This was not a planned scientific study or controlled experiment, but an organic reality unfolding spontaneously in their camp. As Leo gained strength and confidence over the course of those early weeks, a complication that neither Marcus nor Sarah had fully anticipated began to emerge with increasing clarity. The cub was not remaining small and manageable. Lions were known for their rapid growth rates during the juvenile stage, And Leo, despite his extremely rough start and period of deprivation, was growing with the aggressive vigor of a young animal that was being fed regularly and treated with comprehensive medical care. By week 3, the cub had nearly doubled in weight from its arrival, putting on muscle and bone in visible daily increments. The playfulness that had been utterly charming and endearing in a 30-pound malnourished animal was becoming distinctly more forceful and demanding as Leo's strength increased exponentially. The cub's play bites, which had initially been gentle exploration and testing of Marcus and Sarah's reactions, were starting to carry real power and intensity that sometimes drew blood accidentally. Marcus noticed with increasing concern that Leo's behavioral patterns were shifting in fundamental ways. The cub still seemed to regard both humans with something approaching genuine affection and preference, seeking out their company and responding to their voices. But there was also the beginning of something else emerging beneath that affection. An assertion of will and dominance, a testing of boundaries and of the human's tolerance, patterns that suggested Leo's predatory nature and hierarchical instincts were beginning to assert themselves more prominently and prominently. The hunting instinct that should have been suppressed or limited by the cub's young age and dependent status seemed to be awakening in Leo in unexpected ways. During one feeding session, Leo had pounced on Sarah's arm while she was offering food, and though the contact was not aggressive in intent, the power in the movement and the involuntary intensity shocked them both. Sarah had gasped and pulled back instinctively, and for a moment, something flickered in Leo's eyes. Not malice exactly, but a recognition of power, of capability. The cub released her immediately and approached for reassurance, but the moment had revealed something important and troubling. Leo was becoming something other than the vulnerable, rescued animal they had been caring for. He was becoming a predator. Sarah was the first to vocalize the concern that had begun to develop steadily in both their minds during quiet moments and evening discussions. Leo's true nature, temporarily masked and suppressed by trauma and dependency and the struggle for survival, was re-emerging with increasing clarity. The cub was a lion, and lions were apex predators in every meaningful sense. No amount of gentle care and emotional bonding changed that fundamental biological reality. The question that had been lurking unspoken between them, unsaid but present in every interaction, finally came out directly during a medical update discussion on day 21. "How long can we keep him here?" Sarah asked, not meeting Marcus's eyes. "And what happens when he gets bigger? What happens in a year?" Marcus had been asking himself these same difficult questions repeatedly for days, lying awake during his monitoring shifts while Leo slept peacefully on a blanket nearby. Leo had saved them both from the complexity of an abstract ethical dilemma by showing up at their camp in crisis, but that salvation was incomplete and temporary. They had given Leo life, had addressed his immediate medical crisis with skill and compassion, but they had not solved the fundamental problem of what a wild predator's future actually looked like in human captivity. The wound on Leo's hindquarter had healed remarkably well under Sarah's careful care, leaving only prominent scars that would likely fade somewhat as the cub continued to mature and develop. But the psychological wound of Leo's traumatic experience was far less visible and vastly more complex in implications. The cub had been profoundly traumatized by whatever violence had happened to his pride and mother, yet he had somehow survived and had formed genuine bonds with humans who had shown him kindness during his darkest moments. Leo displayed behaviors that suggested a young animal actively working through trauma, sometimes aggressive without clear provocation, sometimes clingy and demanding constant contact, sometimes withdrawn and uncommunicative. The cub would have nightmares with disturbing regularity, evidenced by sudden violent waking and defensive posturing, suggesting that Leo's memories of whatever attack had separated him from his mother were not simply forgotten, but were deeply stored in his nervous system. Marcus began researching available options during the long evenings, using the camp's limited and frustratingly slow internet connection, investigating rehabilitation programs and wildlife sanctuaries, and seeking out expert consultation from researchers who had experience with similar situations. Every potential solution presented significant problems and ethical complications. Releasing Leo back into the wild might be possible eventually, but the cub had been traumatized and separated from his pride at a critical developmental stage when social learning was essential. Any successful reintegration would require the cub to learn complex behavioral patterns that normally came from the mother and the broader pride structure. Rehabilitation centers were few and far between in the region, and many carried fundamental ethical questions about whether they could truly replicate the complex social structures and hierarchies necessary for a lion's psychological development. One morning in early October, during Leo's 8th week in camp, the situation reached a critical juncture that neither Marcus nor Sarah could continue to avoid or defer. The cub was now 70 pounds of increasingly powerful muscle and predatory instinct, still retaining something of the affection he had shown from the moment of rescue, but displaying behaviors that were becoming genuinely dangerous, regardless of intent. That particular morning, Marcus had been assisting Sarah with a routine health examination of Leo, monitoring for any signs of infection in the healing wounds. Leo had been cooperative at first, allowing Sarah to examine the scars on his hindquarter without significant resistance. But as Sarah moved to check the cub's teeth and mouth, Leo suddenly shifted his posture and pinned Sarah's arm with surprising force, not aggressively exactly, but with an intensity and control that made Marcus's heart nearly stop. For perhaps 3 seconds that felt to Marcus like an eternity, Sarah was pinned beneath Leo's jaws, while the cub held her arm completely still, demonstrating a level of power and predatory awareness that was unmistakable. Marcus had frozen completely, every instinct screaming at him to intervene, but he understood viscerally that any sudden movement could trigger something darker in Leo, could convert a moment of assertive testing into genuine predatory response. The paralysis of that moment seemed to stretch impossibly, though he was certain later it had only been 3 or 4 seconds before Leo released her. Then Leo released her immediately and backed away, tail between his legs, clearly showing appeasement behaviors suggesting he had not intended genuine harm. But the message was profoundly clear to both of them. Leo's instincts, suppressed by trauma and dependency in youth, were fully awake now. There was a point beyond which the cub's genuine affection for them could not override his increasingly dominant nature. Sarah examined her arm carefully after Leo released her, finding deep indentations from the cub's teeth, but no actual laceration or bleeding. The dents in her skin would fade within hours, but the implications of Leo's behavior would not fade so easily. That evening, Marcus and Sarah sat on the porch of their tent, watching the Kalahari sunset turn the sky violent shades of orange and purple, while they discussed what could no longer be deferred. The decision they were facing was devastating in its clarity and yet impossible to avoid any longer. They could not keep Leo indefinitely. The cub was becoming an apex predator, and apex predators did not make suitable residents of research camps inhabited by vulnerable humans. Yet releasing Leo into the wild would likely mean death, as the cub had been separated from his pride during crucial developmental stages and carried psychological trauma that had not been resolved. The ethical complexity was paralyzing in its totality. Every option available seemed to betray something fundamental, seemed to represent a failure to fully honor either the animal's needs or the human's responsibilities. Marcus spoke about the possibility of keeping Leo confined, of building a larger enclosure that might accommodate him as he continued to mature. Sarah rejected this immediately, her voice carrying a weight of medical and ethical understanding. A lion was not meant for confinement, she said. To cage Leo would be to slowly destroy the essence of what made him beautiful and alive. To imprison an animal whose entire biological makeup was designed for vast territories and constant movement. But neither could they simply release him. That, too, felt like a betrayal, a surrender to difficulty rather than a genuine attempt to solve it. Sarah made the decision first. She spent an entire night combing through the limited resources available on the camp's internet connection, reaching out through email to every wildlife rehabilitation facility she could identify across southern Africa. Most responses were initially negative. Facilities were overfull with rescued animals and lacked the specialized resources and expertise required for rehabilitating a traumatized wild lion. But persistence led to a contact at a facility in Botswana, about 300 kilometers from their current location. The facility director was a woman named Dr. Elena Kopje, who had spent 20 years working with African predators and who listened carefully to Sarah's detailed description of Leo's situation. Dr. Kopje's response, conveyed through a series of increasingly detailed emails, suggested she understood the profound complexity of what they were attempting. She would accept Leo if, and only if, several specific conditions could be met. The conditions Dr. Kopje outlined were not arbitrary, but were grounded in extensive experience with animals in similar situations. Leo would need to complete a comprehensive behavioral assessment to establish baseline data on his trauma response and his socialization patterns before transfer. The facility had a specialized enclosure where Leo could be introduced to other juvenile lions currently in care, allowing for gradual socialization and the learning of appropriate predatory behavior patterns and hierarchical structures he had missed during his separation from his pride. Sarah and Marcus would need to participate in a handoff period where they gradually reduced their direct contact with Leo while introducing him to Dr. Kopje's team, allowing Leo to form bonds with new human caregivers who would provide continuity during his transition. Most significantly, Dr. Kopia insisted on ongoing behavioral monitoring and documentation even after Leo's transfer, wanting to understand the long-term psychological outcomes for a traumatized young lion, given the opportunity for socialization with his own species in a structured rehabilitation environment. The facility could not guarantee Leo would ever be released into the wild, but Dr. Kopia was honest about the realistic outcomes, explaining that Leo's history of trauma combined with extended human contact meant he would likely need to live in a managed facility for the remainder of his life, perhaps eventually participating in a breeding program intended to strengthen genetic diversity in captive lion populations, or potentially being introduced to a large private reserve where his behavior and instincts could be monitored. It was not the ideal outcome Marcus and Sarah would have wished for Leo, but it was profoundly better than the alternative of either keeping a growing predator in camp or releasing a traumatized, unprepared cub into the African wilderness, where death would be nearly certain within weeks. The realization settled over both of them with a mixture of sadness and a strange form of relief. They could not save Leo in the way they had perhaps initially imagined, creating a happy ending where the cub became a pet or could be simply released back into natural life. But they could save him from death and could give him a future that involved both his own species and humans who understood his history and were committed to his well-being. The next 3 weeks were perhaps the most emotionally difficult of their time in the Kalahari. Sarah and Marcus began the process of gradually introducing Leo to Dr. Kopia's team, who traveled to their camp to spend extended time observing the cub and allowing him to become accustomed to new human voices and presences. Leo's response to the new caregivers was cautiously positive. The cub seemed to understand that nothing threatening was occurring, and his survival instinct and basic social nature overcame any resistance to accepting new sources of comfort and food. But for Marcus in particular, each introduction of new humans represented another small loss of the unique bond he and Sarah had developed with Leo. Marcus had spent virtually all of his waking hours in Leo's presence for nearly 2 months, had monitored the cub's health and development, had been present during the cub's worst nightmares, and also during moments of joyful discovery and play. The emotional investment had become deeper than Marcus had anticipated or fully acknowledged, while the crisis of Leo's rescue and recovery had been consuming all available attention and energy. As the date of Leo's transfer approached, Marcus found himself spending more time alone with the cub, not explicitly planning these extended sessions, but finding himself drawn back to Leo whenever the opportunity arose. Marcus would sit beside Leo's resting place during quiet hours and tell the lion cub about the savannah, about the future the animal would have at the facility in Botswana, about the other young lions he would meet, and the complex social hierarchies he would learn to navigate. Marcus spoke as if Leo could understand English, knowing the specific words likely meant nothing, but believing somehow that the emotional intent behind his voice might convey something meaningful. Leo seemed to enjoy these moments, pressing his head against Marcus's leg or allowing Marcus to run his fingers through the coarse fur of the cub's mane, which was beginning to develop in earnest now. On the night before transfer, Marcus lay beside Leo on the blanket the cub had adopted as his resting place from the very first. The night of rescue, neither slept. Leo remained alert, sensing the emotional turbulence in Marcus, even if the cub could not consciously understand its cause. Marcus listened to Leo's breathing, memorizing the rhythm of it, understanding at some level that this would be the last night of daily contact with this animal he had saved, and that had somehow, impossibly, also saved him. The transfer to Dr. Kopje's facility required a specially equipped transport vehicle and a team trained in moving large predators safely. The cub was sedated lightly, enough to remain calm but not so deeply that consciousness was lost entirely. As Leo drifted into the medicated sleep, the cub's eyes found Marcus one final time, holding the researcher's gaze until the sedative finally pulled him fully under. Marcus watched as trained handlers carefully placed Leo into the padded transport enclosure, ensuring every possible precaution was taken to prevent injury during the journey. Sarah held Marcus's arm as they watched the vehicle depart, carrying Leo away from the camp and toward whatever future awaited him at the rehabilitation facility. Neither spoke. There seemed to be nothing adequate to say. 2 weeks after Leo's transfer, Dr. Kopje sent the first comprehensive report describing Leo's transition to the Botswana facility. The cub had arrived drowsy from sedation, but had recovered from the medication without complications. He had been placed initially in a quiet enclosure with human caregivers present for ongoing monitoring, allowing him time to acclimate to his new surroundings without the stress of social interaction with other lions. Leo had eaten regularly and had shown no signs of aggression or abnormal stress response. After 5 days, Leo had been introduced through a secure barrier to another young lion of similar age who was also in rehabilitation following a rescue situation. The initial contact had been cautious on both sides, but neither animal had shown signs of aggression. Gradually, the barrier had been reduced, and by day 10, both lions were sharing the same enclosure and displaying normal play behavior appropriate for their age. Most significantly, Dr. Kopje reported that Leo's nightmares had decreased dramatically. The sedation and the terrifying ride in the transport vehicle had apparently reset Leo's trauma responses somehow. Or perhaps the presence of another lion his own age had provided something that human interaction could not. Dr. Kopje's interpretation was that Leo's psychological recovery was actually accelerated by being placed with another member of his own species who could engage with him in behaviors and communication patterns that humans fundamentally could not replicate. Follow-up reports over the subsequent months documented Leo's continued development. The cub bonded with his same-age companion, and together they were introduced to slightly older juvenile males in the facility, gradually building the complex social structures and hierarchical relationships essential for healthy adult lion behavior. Leo's traumatic past did not disappear entirely, but it became manageable, integrated into his developing personality rather than defining it. By his first birthday, Leo had grown into a powerful young lion of nearly 200 pounds, his personality displaying a mix of the confidence one would expect from a healthy young male combined with an unusual gentleness and lack of aggression toward humans that Dr. Kopje attributed directly to his early experiences with Marcus and Sarah. The facility incorporated Leo into their educational programs, where carefully supervised visitors could observe him and learn about lion behavior and conservation. Leo became an ambassador of sorts for his species, teaching humans about the complexity and intelligence of lions while simultaneously benefiting from the continued interaction with humans who had learned his history and were committed to his welfare. The facility eventually made the decision to keep Leo as a permanent resident rather than attempting any reintroduction program. Leo's history and psychological makeup made him unsuitable for release into the wild, but he thrived in the structured environment of the rehabilitation facility where his needs could be met with precision and his life could have meaning beyond mere survival. The facility bred Leo with carefully selected females when he reached reproductive maturity, and he fathered cubs who never knew the trauma of abandoned hunger or violent separation from their family. Those offspring carried Leo's genes into the next generation, and some of those cubs were eventually released into protected areas where they contributed to healthy wild populations. In this way, Leo's survival and his recovery contributed to something larger than his own individual life. Over the years, Dr. Copier noted remarkable behavioral patterns emerging in Leo as he matured. The young lion demonstrated a capacity for empathy and social understanding that exceeded even her expectations based on his early trauma. When new animals arrived at the facility, wounded or frightened and struggling to adapt, Leo seemed to sense their distress. The aging lion would position himself nearby, but never aggressively, offering quiet presence that appeared genuinely comforting to the newcomers. Some of the facility staff theorized that Leo was using his own survival experience as a kind of emotional roadmap, showing traumatized animals that recovery was possible because he himself, LF, had recovered. Whether this interpretation was accurate or merely anthropomorphic projection, the outcome was undeniable. Animals introduced to proximity with Leo showed measurably faster adaptation times to captivity and lower stress hormone levels compared to animals kept in isolation. Leo had become not just a resident of the facility, but a therapeutic presence within it. Marcus and Sarah continued their research work in the Kalahari for another 5 years following Leo's transfer. Their study, focusing on predator behavior and the relationship between predators and the broader ecosystem, eventually resulted in publications that contributed meaningfully to wildlife conservation efforts in southern Africa. But neither researcher ever quite returned to the purely clinical approach they had maintained before Leo's arrival. They had learned something fundamental about the capacity for connection across species lines, about the possibility of genuine healing even after profound trauma, about how love and dedication could manifest in unexpected ways. Sarah maintained correspondence with Dr. Copier throughout this period, receiving regular updates on Leo's progress and development. The photographs that came with each report showed a gradually maturing lion, moving from the vulnerable adolescence of his early months at the facility toward the powerful but surprisingly gentle adult he became. When Sarah and Marcus eventually left the Kalahari to pursue different research opportunities in their careers, one of the most difficult aspects of their departure was knowing they would no longer receive direct information about Leo's current status and well-being. But they had learned by this point that sometimes you had to let go of things you cared about, had to trust that the foundations you had helped establish would endure without your constant presence and monitoring. Years later, long after both Marcus and Sarah had moved on to different careers and different continents, word reached them of Leo's death from natural causes at the age of 17, a full lifespan for a lion. He had fathered multiple generations of cubs, had lived without hunger or fear or abandonment, and had somehow managed to use his survived trauma as a foundation for a life that mattered. The skinny, fever-ridden cub that Marcus had found nearly dead at the camp's edge had become an animal that exemplified not just survival, but genuine thriving and recovery and meaning. When Sarah received the news, she found herself crying not from grief exactly, but from a complex mixture of emotions. Gratitude that Leo had lived a full life, sadness at the loss of a being who had changed her fundamentally, and a strange sense of completion knowing that Leo's story had a beginning and a middle, and now an end that encompassed real flourishing rather than tragedy. The rescue that had seemed so urgent and impossible in those early weeks had turned into something far more complex and ultimately far more beautiful than either Marcus or Sarah could have anticipated when they were still operating in crisis mode, focused only on the immediate demands of keeping the cub alive through the next day. They had learned over the intervening years that sometimes the greatest act of love required letting go, required trusting that the world contained other people and other places capable of providing care even after your own role ended. The storm that had separated Leo from his pride had been terrible and traumatic, but from that trauma had emerged a future neither human nor lion could have predicted. Not a return to the wild, exactly. Not a simple life as a pet, but something altogether different and ultimately more valuable. Leo's life had rippled outward in ways neither Marcus nor Sarah could fully quantify. The facility where he had lived had become a model for how to treat traumatized predators with both compassion and scientific rigor. Leo's offspring carried his genes and apparently also something of his temperament into protected wild areas. The researchers and students who had worked with him had learned lessons about animal behavior that extended far beyond feline psychology into questions about consciousness and healing and the fundamental capacity of damaged beings to recover and contribute meaningfully to their communities. Sometimes the most profound rescues happen not in the moment of initial intervention, but in the months and years that follow, as damaged creatures gradually discover how to live again, with all their wounds visible and acknowledged, but no longer defining the totality of their existence. Marcus had eventually become director of a major conservation organization focused on predator protection and rehabilitation. Sarah had continued her veterinary work, specializing in treating trauma cases in wild animals. Both of them carried with them always the memory of a skinny lion cub that had stumbled out of the African wilderness looking for rescue and had ultimately provided something far more valuable in return. A reminder that connection across species boundaries was possible, that healing was achievable even after profound loss, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was to save a life and then trust another to continue that work after your own part was finished.